Do you know what's going on in your kid's school? If not, now would be a good time to take a look. Here's what you're likely to find. According to the education establishment, the purpose of public education is no longer just to teach the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. It is to awaken students to the fact that they live in a country that has been, remains, and will probably always be racist. Here's how the American Association of School Administrators, AASA, recently described its mission. At a time of obscene inequities, merely trying to compensate is not enough. AASA's work must go further and become actively anti-racist. Being anti-racist sounds simple and laudable. Treat everyone the same. A version of the golden rule. What could be wrong with that? Nothing. Except, that's not what the educational elite means by anti-racism. Anti-racism, in its current formulation, does not mean equal treatment of others. It is an all-encompassing ideology that demands that white people accept that their behavior is either implicitly or explicitly racist, and has been for at least 400 years. The catch-22 here is that to say you're not racist only proves how racist you really are. That is, you are so racist you don't even know it. And if this accusation upsets you, that's proof of your white fragility. Education Week's Classroom Q&A blog tells teachers that, as Ibram X. Kendi, the author of How to Be an Anti-Racist would say, there is no not racist. There is only racist and anti-racist. Your silence favors the status quo and the violently oppressive harm it does to black and brown folk everywhere. What Kendi is saying is, if you don't voice active agreement with him, you are a racist. And if you treat people equally regardless of race, you're also a racist. Anti-racists embrace racial discrimination, as long as it's done on their terms. As Kendi has said, the only remedy to racist discrimination is anti-racist discrimination. The only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. I understand how wrong this might sound. It turns the Martin Luther King concept of racial equality on its head. But that's exactly the point. Lorena Germain, who chairs the Committee on Anti-Racism for the National Council of the Teaching of English, makes this clear. At the height of the recent urban unrest, Germain wrote that arsonists should serve as a model for teachers. Educators, what are you burning? Your white-centered curriculum? The school's racist policies? Your racist-ass principal? The funding for police and schools versus counselors? What are you burning? Germain's call to commit arson may have been metaphorical, but her call to get rid of the traditional school curriculum is not. A lesson plan created by the New York City Culturally Responsive Education Working Group, Transforming Our Public Schools, a guide to culturally responsive and sustaining education, tells teachers that the whole Western canon is rife with horrible stories and atrocities of who we are as people of color. For their part, the National Committee on Social Studies has promised to flood our children with countermessages until there is no racial inequality in economic opportunity, no racial inequality in education, no racial inequality in incarceration rates, and no brutality from police and others. If that sounds to you a lot more like political indoctrination than education, you would be right. New York State now encourages teachers to incorporate current events, even if they are controversial, into instruction, and to utilize tools that encourage students to engage with difficult topics, power, privilege, access, inequity, constructively. We might all wish that as cultural and political polarization reaches into more and more areas of American life, schools could remain an apolitical oasis where children can learn to read, write, and develop skills of socialization. But if that's what you want for your children, then just know that anti-racist educators think that you are part of the problem. According to a writer for Teaching Tolerance, a project of the Southern Poverty Law Center, anti-racist educators recognize that schools today are doing exactly what they were built to do in this country: exclude, silence, erase, promote white supremacy. An anti-racist approach to schooling could very well mean an ending to schools as we know them. That is certainly true. The National Council on the Teaching of English insists there is no apolitical classroom. The educational elite has a very clear lesson plan in mind for your children. If you're okay with it, you can send Johnny and Jennifer off to school with a glad heart. If you're not okay with it, better talk to the principal, or get ready with a plan B. I'm Max Eden, Senior Fellow at the Manhattan Institute for PragerU University.
Have you heard of the 1619 Project? It was published by the New York Times in August of 2019. It won the Pulitzer Prize for Commentary in 2020. Its thesis: the United States was founded in 1619 when the first slave was brought to North America. Wait, that brings up some questions. What happened to 1776? To July 4th? The Declaration of Independence? George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison? According to the 1619 Project, the Founding Fathers pushed for all that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness stuff to protect their slave holdings. Independence from England? That was just a smokescreen. To them, everything that's wrong with America is tied to her original sin of slavery, from segregation to traffic jams. Yes, traffic jams. For the 1619 Project authors, racism is not a part of the American experience. It is the American experience. Is this true? Let's look at 3 of the project's major claims. 1. Preserving slavery was the real cause of the American Revolution. If you asked the founders why they no longer wanted to be a British colony, they would have given you a long list of reasons. Taxation without representation, conflicts over debts from the French and Indian War, and the Stamp Act would be just a few. Probably most important was the burning desire to be free, to chart their own destiny as a sovereign nation. Protecting slavery was not under threat from the British. In fact, Britain didn't free the slaves in its overseas colonies until 1833, 53 years later, after the Declaration of Independence. Yes, the subject of slavery was hotly debated at the Constitutional Convention, but that was after the war was won. 2. Slavery made America rich. Slavery made some Americans rich, true enough. Eli Yale, for example, made a fortune in the slave trade. He donated money and land for the university that is named after him. But the institution of slavery didn't make America rich. In fact, the slave system badly slowed the economic development of half the country. As economist Thomas Sowell points out, in 1860, just 1 year before the Civil War began, the South had only 1/6 as many factories as the North. Almost 90% of the country's skilled, well-paid laborers and professionals were based in the North. Banking, railroads, manufacturing, all were concentrated in the North. The South was an economic backwater. And the cost of abolishing slavery was enormous, not merely in terms of dollars — Lincoln borrowed billions to pay for it — but also in terms of human life. 360,000 Union soldiers died in order to free 4 million slaves. That works out to about 1 soldier in blue for every 10 slaves freed. It's hard to look at that butcher's bill and conclude that the nation turned a profit from slavery. And many things have happened since 1865. In the almost 200 years since the Civil War, the population of the country has grown almost 900%, and our national GDP has increased 12,000%. Slavery did not make America rich. 3. Racism is an unchangeable part of America. This argument is more philosophical than scholarly, but it undergirds the entire 1619 Project. It's also pernicious because it suggests that the United States is an inherently racist country that can't overcome its flaws. Yet that's exactly what it's done. Today, America is the most successful multiracial country in history, the only white majority country to elect a black president twice. Of course, progress has not always been smooth. There have been terrible setbacks. But to compare American attitudes about race today to America 100 years ago, let alone to 1619, is absurd. Here's a fact that should be better known. 2 million black Africans have come to America as legal immigrants from countries like Nigeria in the last 50 years and have become one of the most successful groups in the country. Why would these folks move to what is often called an evil Racist country? Because unlike many people lucky enough to be born here, they know that America is a land of opportunity for everyone. It's also only fair to note that while blacks have heroically fought for our rights, often against great odds, we haven't done it alone. A vast number of decent whites have also advanced the cause of racial equality. To cite one of countless examples, the U.S. Senate that passed the landmark Civil Rights Act in 1964 contained 98 whites and 2 men of color, and they were Asian. The great black leaders of the past, Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington, Martin Luther King, never lost faith in America's promise that all people are created equal. None of them believed that racism was America's defining characteristic. They were right. Shortly after the 1619 Project was published, a group of distinguished historians, almost all on the left, wrote a public letter condemning the work. They called it a displacement of historical understanding by ideology. They were right too. I'm Wilfred Riley, Associate Professor of Political Science at Kentucky State University for Prager University.
This video was made possible through a generous grant from Dr. Bob and the Shillman Foundation.
What kind of future do we have if we destroy our past? Has anyone who has pulled down a statue of Churchill, Lincoln, or Columbus thought to ask themselves this question? I doubt it. The presumption that we can stand in perfect judgment over the lives of historical figures is not merely foolish and unfair, it's dangerous. Consider what the statue destroyers are in effect saying. They are saying that people in history should have known what we know. That's tantamount to saying they should have known the future. This is, of course, absurd. Yet more and more people believe it. Why? Simple. It's what they're taught. It is the fruit of an education system that long ago prioritized empathy over facts, that believes the ultimate point of history is not to learn lessons from it, but to judge it from the preordained left-wing conclusions about such ill-defined concepts as social justice, equity, and tolerance. Apart from breeding ignorance, this kind of education invites the student, the child really, to be judge, jury, and executioner over issues that they, and increasingly their teachers, know little or nothing about. Because no one has bothered to teach them the nuance, complexity, and context that is history. It also breeds arrogance. I know things these people did not know, therefore I am better than they were, they have nothing to teach me, in fact I must teach them, and down comes the statue. A new, better history must take the place of the old one. In America, this impulse has culminated in the 1619 Project, an initiative started by the New York Times and now in schools everywhere, which attempts to make the arrival of the first African slaves into the American colonies the foundational date of the American Republic. 1776, the American Revolution? In the new history, that was just about protecting the founders' slave interests. These men, some of the most remarkable humans to have lived at any time, are to be understood simply by their attitude towards this one issue. The 1619 Project seeks to portray America, the freest, most prosperous nation in world history, as exceptional only in one respect, insofar as being exceptionally bad. This is a purposefully destructive view of history. It is one intended to pull down rather than to build up. A healthy, humane, and in the truest sense liberal mind does not view history as a mere playpen for our moral judgment. It recognizes that people in the past acted on the information they had just as we do today. Sure, it would have been nice if the founders of America had abolished slavery in its constitution. Some, in fact, tried very hard to do so. But had they been unwilling to compromise, there would be no constitution and no United States. All the sacrifices of the Revolution would have been lost, so a compromise balancing the interests of the northern states and the southern states was reached. It would have been nice if the Japanese had surrendered before atom bombs were dropped over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but they didn't. President Truman had to make his decision based on the information he had at the time. that an Allied invasion of the Japanese home island would cost at least 1 million lives, both American and Japanese. Of course, the woke mind abhors these subtleties. It knows that it is right, and that everybody before our current age, year zero, should have known better. Anyway, they were all bigots. Why should we give them any benefit of the doubt, let alone admire them or learn from them? Well, maybe because, like everyone else, the great figures of the past did the best they could under the circumstances in which they found themselves. That their efforts largely succeeded is why we are here. When someone tried to give Sir Isaac Newton credit for his world-changing discoveries in physics, the great man demurred. He said he was only able to achieve what he did by standing on the shoulders of the giants who went before him. Today's left rejects Newton's humility. It doesn't believe that we stand on anyone's shoulders. It imagines that if we could only liberate ourselves from the dusty, misguided, and misinformed ideas of the past, then we might see further, fly still higher. This view is wrong. Divorced from our past, we would be utterly lost. We would not rise, but plummet. We would be forced to start again with far less insight and with far poorer examples as our guides. Ironically, thanks to the statue destroyers, the great figures of the past have never looked greater. I'm Douglas Murray, author of The Madness of Crowds, for Prager University.
What's happening in our schools? Colleges have become leftist indoctrination centers. It's not a new problem. It's been going on for decades, first behind the scenes and now out front. That's how radical change happens. It creeps up on us. And when we finally figure out what's going on, it's too late. What's been happening on college campuses is now happening in elementary schools and high schools. I know. I'm a mom of 2 school-aged kids. I've seen it with my own eyes. More and more parents are seeing it too. Thanks to the lockdowns and Zoom, we're getting a window into our children's classes. It's not a pretty picture. Kids, really young kids, are being taught stuff so radical, so devoid of what real education is, it should alarm us all. Here are a few examples. Recently, Chicago Public Schools adopted an American history curriculum based on the 1619 Project published and promoted by the New York Times. The 1619 Project asserts that America's founding was not marked by the Declaration of Independence in 1776, but the arrival of the first African slaves in Jamestown in 1619. Historians from across the political spectrum have denounced this as a giant lie. The New York Times has walked back many of the project's original claims. Still, this malicious slander of America is now being taught in schools as truth. And what is that truth? That America is, was, and always has been a fundamentally racist country, and that white Americans today bear responsibility for all current and historic racism. This bleeds perfectly into another educational debacle: diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, this might sound innocent, but don't be fooled. It's a dangerous euphemism for something called critical race theory. Critical race theory says that racism is woven into the very fabric of American society. What does this look like in a school setting? Middle and high school students in Wellesley, Massachusetts, are being taught to be on the lookout for unconscious racial bias in their classmates. "We need your help," an email to students reads. "Your school leaders will be working with you this year on how to be proactive about preventing bias incidents and how to report them should they occur." This warped vision of America doesn't stop at race. In Colorado, first graders are being taught that just because someone looks like a boy doesn't mean they are. Only they can know who they truly are. Gender is something they choose for themselves, based on how masculine or feminine they feel. Or maybe they're not fully a boy or a girl, but something in between, whatever that may be. To repeat, that's what children are taught in first grade. Imagine what they're taught in second or third grade. And, of course, the world faces imminent disaster from global warming. The American Federation of Teachers has fully endorsed the most radical aspects of the Green New Deal, which is already featured in California school curriculums. In sum, many of our schools are teaching children that our past is terrible and that they have no future. That if they are white, they are racist whether they know it or not. If they're black, they're victims, whether they experience it or not. That they should constantly question their sexual identity. With all this being drummed into their heads, no wonder today's kids have more psychological problems than any previous generation. Maybe you think I'm cherry-picking examples to exaggerate my point, or maybe you're one of the lucky ones who sends your kids to a school that has yet to be infected by this radical agenda. Maybe. But if I were you, I wouldn't take it on faith. Find out for yourself. When I did, I was shocked to learn that all of this is happening in my school district right now. So find out what's being taught in your kid's school. Take a good hard look at curricula. Ask administrators if they endorse the 1619 project. Are they pushing a diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda? If so, demand to see what materials the school is using. At a minimum, get to know your kids' teachers and principals. Join the PTA, attend local school board meetings, look for allies among reasonable, like-minded parents. You don't have to agree with each other on everything. You just have to agree that the brainwashing of our children stops here. Stops now. Americans know what our children should be learning, that they must take responsibility for their conduct, that race is the least important aspect of another person, that hard work and rational thought are things we all value, that there is nothing wrong with the bodies they were born into, and that America was founded not to promote racism, but to guarantee sacred liberties and opportunities to its citizens. And it wouldn't hurt if they learned reading and writing and math, too. I'm Jill Simonian, founder of thefabmom.com for Prager University.
Have you heard about critical race theory? I'm guessing you probably have. It has already insinuated itself into many institutions and is making rapid progress into others. If it takes hold, it will completely change the very nature of America and the way you live. Critical race theory holds that the most important thing about you is your race. The color of your skin, that's who you are. Not your behavior, not your values, not your environment. Your race. In critical race theory, if you are a member of a minoritized racial group, their term, not mine, you are a victim of a system that is rigged against you, a system that doesn't want you to succeed. On the other hand, if your race is privileged, you're an exploiter, whether you intend to be or not. Critical race theory begins from the assumption that racism occurs in all interactions. To see how this works, consider this thought experiment. Imagine you own a shop and two customers enter at the same time, one white and one black. Who do you help first? If you help the black person first, critical race theory would say you did so because you don't trust black people to be left alone in your store. That's racist. If you help the white person first instead, critical race theory would say you did so because you think blacks are second-class citizens. That's racist too. That's critical race theory. It can find racism in anything, even if it has to read your mind to do it. Critical race theory is a uniquely American invention. Brewed up at Harvard Law School in the 70s, now part of the academic and media mainstream, it is also uniquely un-American because it rejects the core tenets of the American, classically liberal Judeo-Christian value system. It turns the bedrock American idea upside down. Here it is in the words of Richard Delgado and Gene Stefanchik, two leading proponents. Critical race theory questions the very foundations of the liberal order, including equality theory, legal reasoning, Enlightenment rationalism, and the neutral principles of constitutional law. It does this because critical race theory proponents assume racism is present everywhere and always, and they look for it critically until they find it. And they always find it. It has to be there because that's how the imperial European powers and then America set things up. Here, as in all dangerous academic theories, there is a kernel of truth. Human beings were not preoccupied with race until the 16th century, when Europeans began to explore and then colonize other parts of the world. Drawing distinctions between the races reached its peak in the 19th century with the widespread use of slave labor in North and South America. No one denies this. But since then, the Western world, and most especially America, has spent a lot of time, money, and blood breaking free of its racist past. It's been a rocky road for sure, but great progress has been made. Critical race theory says all this progress is a mirage. Racism never died, never even faded a little bit. It just hid itself better. Critical race theory, therefore, is not a continuation of the civil rights movement. It is, in fact, a repudiation of it. To critical race theorists, Martin Luther King was both wrong and naive. White Americans can never judge blacks by the content of their character. They can only judge them, always unfavorably, consciously or unconsciously, by the color of their skin. Ironically, not since the Aryan obsession in Germany in the 1930s and 1940s, or South African apartheid in the second half of the 20th century, has the social movement been so obsessed with race. Critical race theory is then, in a very real sense, a counter-American revolution. But that's a positive, not a negative to those who subscribe to the theory. The American experiment was given a 400-year tryout, and it doesn't work. So let's scrap it. That's what they believe. Is that what you believe? I'm going to guess that most of you don't. So how do we stop critical race theory before it infects the brains of too many decent Americans, especially young people, and turns us into something we have never been and shouldn't ever want to be? The answer is simple. Refuse to accept it. Don't be intimidated by the heads I win, tails you lose logic of this self-destructive, America-hating, anti-reality idea. Don't be bullied into thinking that you're racist when you know you're not, or that you're a victim when you know you're not. Defend yourself, while you still can. I'm James Lindsay, founder of New Discourses for Prager University.
In the town where I grew up in El Salvador, we had one school. It was old and run down. There weren't enough teachers. There weren't enough textbooks. But my mother was a determined woman, and she had a plan, an amazing plan. I and my siblings would not get our education in El Salvador. We would get it in America. So we left our home, our family, everything and everyone we had ever known. I guess you could say it was an extreme example of school choice. It was a miserable bus ride to California, long and hot, but we made it. That was the easy part. My mother barely spoke English. I spoke none. When I complained to her that it was too hard to learn in American schools, I didn't get much sympathy. We had reached the promised land, the promise of a good education, of unlimited opportunity. English, good English, was required. So I learned it. My mom made sure of that. With that kind of background, you can imagine that I put a premium on the education of my own children. So when my son approached first grade, I took a hard look at the government school in our neighborhood. I didn't like what I saw. Academic standards were low, discipline was lax. I saw no good future there for my son, but I didn't have the money for private school. I did some research. I found that my district offered something they call a fundamental school, kind of like a charter school, where they stress reading, writing, and math. The test results at this school were higher than at the government school. This was exactly what I wanted for my son. I wasn't the only one. Many other parents had come to the same conclusion. But there weren't enough slots at the school to meet the demand. The only way to get in was through a lottery. My son's education was going to be determined by a lottery? I was frustrated and angry, but I had no alternative, no choice. He didn't get in the first year, but he did in the second year. We got lucky. This didn't make me any less angry, though. I decided to do something with my anger. I decided I would run for school board and push for every parent to have a choice of schools for their children. It shouldn't be a matter of luck. I had no experience running for local office. I certainly wasn't a politician. I was just a mom with an issue. I guess that was enough because I won. But like my long bus ride from El Salvador years ago, that proved to be the easy part. The government school system was in worse shape than I thought. Enrollment was declining, but costs were going up. We had more teachers making more money, teaching fewer kids. with no test improvement to show for it. Why don't we try school choice? I suggested at a board meeting. Introduce competition, because competition almost always makes things better. This sounded like common sense to me. To the teachers' union, it was treason. First came the nasty emails, then the ugly tweets. When I wouldn't shut up, the union packed board meetings with their activists. They booed me, called me names you wouldn't believe. I was even physically threatened. All because I had made the case for school choice. When they couldn't intimidate me, they tried to get me thrown off the school board. When I decided to run for a second term, the union leaders declared war. They spent almost $250,000 against me in 2016, $250,000 for a seat on a local school board. But I won. Again, this time with more votes than any other candidate. And the reason is clear to me. Parents want good schools for their children. They want choice. And this got me thinking. Teachers have a union. Why not parents? So I started the parent union to give parents more of a voice. And now chapters are all over the state and in some of Southern California's toughest neighborhoods. It's a battle, but I'm confident we'll win. There are few forces stronger than a parent determined to get a good education for their child. I'm Cecilia Iglesias, President of the Parent Union for Prager University.
This video was made possible through a generous donation from Bob and Ruth Reingold.
What if schools had to compete for students in the same way that businesses have to compete for customers? Would schools get better or worse? There's no need to guess. In almost every state and city where there is competition today, educational outcomes improve, often dramatically. This competition is called school choice, and many states and cities now embrace it. With the old model under which most American children still live, the government, not the parent, decides which school children will attend. Now here's how school choice works. The money follows the student. Every child receives funding that their parents can direct to the school of their choice, public, private, charter, or even homeschool. According to researchers at the University of Arkansas, in the most comprehensive study done to date, students in school choice programs saw their reading and math scores improve by 27% and 15% respectively. Sounds like something we should get behind, doesn't it? But for millions of families in my home state of California and in many others, school choice is not a choice. And there's one reason why. Teachers' unions. I've been a teacher for 28 years and served as a leader in a local affiliate of the California Teachers Association, so I've seen this problem from the inside. Teachers in California public schools are coerced to pay dues to the teachers' union. True, we cannot be forced to join, but we are forced to pay the union. Their fees are mandatory and expensive. In California alone, the unions raise over $300 million every year. What do the unions do with all that money? They lobby the government for more money for public education. That might sound good, but it's really just a smokescreen. The National Center for Education Statistics reports that since 1970, public school attendance in the U.S. has gone up by just 5%, while public school employment has gone up 95%. More public school employment means more dues for the unions, but does it mean better schools? Certainly not in California, which ranks 45th in the nation in reading and math, despite spending over $55 billion a year on education. That's over 52% of the state's total budget. Yet rarely is anyone held accountable for these dismal results. I've personally seen excellent new teachers lose their jobs while incompetent and even abusive veteran teachers keep theirs because of the union's infamous last-in, first-out, layoff, and tenure rules. For these reasons and more, parents almost always prefer school choice when allowed to choose. This is obviously true for wealthy parents who can afford to send their children to any school they want, but it's equally true for middle-class and poor parents when they have a choice. And here's the real giveaway. Public school teachers are less likely to send their children to public schools when given the choice. Why are most school choice options better? because teachers at these schools are free from the union's stifling work rules. In short, they're free to teach. And the administrators at these schools are also free to reward good teachers and fire bad ones. The teachers' unions don't like school choice because it means less money and less power for them. That's why they'll say anything, do anything, and spend any amount to stop it, whether in the halls of the legislature, on the campaign trail backing pro-union candidates, or on TV with sweet-sounding commercials. During my public school teaching career, I have worked alongside many other teachers to reform the unions from within. Only when we realized that this wasn't possible did we take our case to a higher power, literally, all the way to the United States Supreme Court. The argument behind our lawsuit, Friedrichs versus California Teachers Association, was simple. Teachers should be able to decide for themselves without fear or coercion whether or not to fund or join a union. Unfortunately, in a split 4-4 decision, we lost. But I haven't lost hope because the unions and the politicians do not ultimately have the power. We do. If you believe, like me and millions of others, that parents, not the government, should decide where their children go to school and that competition will make all schools better, then join the school choice movement. We can have good schools for all our children. We just have to make the choice. For choice. I'm Rebecca Friedrichs, mother and California public school teacher for Prager University.
The first thing you should know about me, I'm a very lucky guy. The second thing you should know is I'm blind, and that's why I'm wearing these. I was born with retinal cancer, and at 10 months old, I lost my left eye. And at 12 years old, I lost my right. So why am I so lucky then? I'll give you 3 reasons. I have a loving and supporting family. I play competitive golf, which I love. And I'm the long snapper for the University of Southern California, which I love even more. But there's another reason why I'm lucky. And that's because even though I'm blind, even though I have special needs, I got a great education. There is 6.5 million public school students in the United States who, like me, have special needs. Some of them have more serious disabilities than I do. Some of them less. But most aren't as lucky as I am. I went to Orange Lutheran, a private high school in Southern California. My school gave me a tutor that was able to help me through calculus and other advanced placement courses. They gave me the same opportunities and expectations as any other student. And now I go to a great college. But this was only possible because I was born into a family that could afford private school. In California, that's the only way special needs students can be assured a good education. Why? Because in California and in most states, if you're a special needs student, you don't have any choices. If you cannot afford a private school, you are stuck in going to the public school that the government chooses for you. I tried that at first, but right off the bat, there were problems. All the special needs students in my district were grouped into one class. Academic ability didn't matter. Interest didn't matter. It only mattered that you had a disability. Even if I were to outperform other students, say in honors chemistry, I couldn't take the class with them because I was blind. And this was in Orange County, California, home to some of the nation's top public schools. Imagine what it's like in less fortunate communities. But thanks to my parents, I had options. So I left the public school and went to a private one. But what about the millions of special needs students in middle to lower income families? Don't they deserve the same opportunities that I had? Of course they do. And that's why I'm for school choice. With school choice, the money follows the student. Every child receives funding that their parents can direct to the school that best fits their needs. Public, private, charter, even homeschool. No one is stuck in a school that doesn't work for them. 12 states already employ school choice programs for special needs students, and it works. One great example comes from Florida. The McKay Scholarship Program for students with disabilities gives kids the choice to attend the public school in their district, a public school in another district, or even a private school. A study by the Manhattan Institute showed marked improvement in reading and math scores for the students in the program. Not surprisingly, this program is becoming more popular. In 2009, 20,000 special needs students enrolled. In 2015, that number had grown to over 31,000. But instead of trying to duplicate this success, teachers' unions and the politicians in their pocket cling to the old model, which benefits them, not students. In states like California, New York, and even Texas, they have managed to block school choice entirely. But fortunately, they don't have the final say. More and more Americans believe that special needs students deserve a quality education. It shouldn't depend on whether you're lucky enough to be born into a family that can afford private school, or whether you're lucky enough to be born in the right district or right state. It shouldn't depend on luck at all. No one sees this more clearly than I do. I'm Jake Olson for Prager University.
Public schools aren't the answer for everyone. They weren't the answer for me. Schools in my neighborhood in Jacksonville, Florida, functioned less as places of learning and more as warehouses to keep kids off the street. I know, I was one of those kids. I don't blame teachers or parents. I'm not interested in blaming anybody. I'm only interested in making things better. And the only way to do that is to give parents and students a choice. If a student can't get the education they need at their public school, there has to be an alternative. Thankfully, there was for me. My early years in my Jacksonville school were not a success, to put it mildly. I seldom understood the lesson. I was often confused and frustrated. I asked my teachers questions, but it seemed to me that this just annoyed them. So I stopped asking questions, and I withdrew into myself. I failed third grade twice. Fourth and fifth weren't much better. I lashed out by getting into fights with my classmates. D's and F's filled my report card. I was going nowhere. I was just another black kid in the warehouse. But fortunately for me, my life changed the summer before sixth grade. I went to live with my godmother. She had one overriding thought: to get me into a better school. A good education, she knew, was the only way to get out of the hole I had dug myself into. She didn't have any more money than my family did, but she had a plan. That was worth a lot. She knew about another school, a private school. Using a tax credit scholarship, you can call it a voucher, she enrolled me at Esprit de Corps Center for Learning. Esprit demands excellence from its students. It teaches them to be warriors for knowledge and for good values. The teachers at Esprit were invested in my success. They took the time to figure out why learning was so difficult for me, and they tailored their instruction to my learning style. Sound elite? It is. Sound expensive? It's not. In fact, Esprit spends less money per student than the public school I had attended. Instead of dreading my classes, I began to look forward to them. Instead of fistfights, I began doing community service work. I even earned the National Police Athletic League's Girl of the Year award in 2009. When it was time for me to apply to college, Esprit even helped me to research scholarships and apply for waivers so that I could take my college entrance test for free. On June 5, 2010, I graduated from Esprit de Corps with honors, becoming the first member of my immediate family to earn a high school diploma, and eventually the first to earn a college degree, and then a master's. Without school choice, none of this would have been possible. Why is it so hard to grasp? Why are so many people so resistant to children and parents having a choice of schools? The system, especially for economically disadvantaged kids, is broken. I've seen it up close, and I've seen what happens when it works better when there is choice. School choice allows parents who live in undervalued neighborhoods to pick the school that best works for their children. Of course, the opponents of school choice, the politicians, and the teachers' unions who profit off of keeping poor black kids trapped in the warehouse, say it takes money away from students who need it the most. But does anybody believe that money is the problem? Washington, D.C., for example, spends over $20,000 per student. We don't need any more money. We need more choice. Let's challenge public schools to compete on quality. Only competition breeds excellence. Prosperous parents can choose where to send their kids to school, public, private, or charter. wherever they have the best chance to succeed. Why shouldn't all parents have that choice? We have the money to make it happen. We just need the will. None of us deserve to be imprisoned by our zip codes. Education is the only way out of generational poverty. I'm a living example. Let's help redefine public education to make it work for everybody. There's only one way to do that. School choice. What are we waiting for? I'm Denisha Merriweather for Prager University.
Shortly after taking office, President Barack Obama's Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, acknowledged that America's public school system is broken. It's obvious the system's broken, he said. Let's admit it's broken. Let's admit it's dysfunctional. Let's do something dramatically different, and let's do it now. Let's fix the thing. Why are America's public schools failing? Why, after more than a quarter century of perpetual reform, has the nation been unable to bring real change to public education? Well, a complete answer, of course, would be very complicated. But at the heart of it lies the power of the teachers' unions, the National Education Association, the American Federation of Teachers, and their state and local affiliates. Now, I don't say this out of some sort of anti-union ideology. I say it as an objective description of reality, backed by an enormous amount of data. Union power has created insurmountable problems for effective schools. Why has this happened? Partly it's because the teachers' unions are by far the most powerful groups in American education. More than that, they're special interest groups, which means that they use their power to promote the special interests, the job interests of their members. They're just not in the business of representing the interests of children, and no one should expect them to do that. The purpose of a union is to represent the job interests of its members, and these interests are simply not the same as the interests of children. So how then do they pursue these job interests? Well, they do it in two ways. The first is through collective bargaining, which takes place in local school districts. Through collective bargaining, the unions are able to win countless restrictive work rules written into binding contracts that specify how the schools must be organized. Typically, for example, these contracts include salary rules requiring that teachers be paid entirely on the basis of seniority and credentials, without any regard for whether their students are actually learning anything. Often, these contracts also include seniority rules that allow senior teachers to take desirable jobs that come open, even if these teachers are mediocre in the classroom or a bad fit for the school. There are also seniority rules requiring that, in layoff situations, excellent young teachers must be let go automatically, and their senior colleagues must be kept on no matter how incompetent they may be. Labor contracts are just filled with these kinds of perverse rules. No one who's thinking only of what is best for kids would ever organize the schools in this way. Yet this is how America's schools are actually organized. The other way teachers' unions shape the public schools is through the political process, where they simply have far more clout than any other education groups by many orders of magnitude. They have over 4 million members. They are top contributors to political campaigns. They have armies of activists in the electoral trenches. They have lobbying organizations in all 50 states, and much more. They've used this political clout to block or substantially weaken major reforms. For decades, for example, reformers have tried to bring accountability to American education, but the unions have stood in the way. They've opposed using test scores to measure teacher performance. They've opposed performance-based pay. They've even opposed moving bad teachers out of the classroom. As a result, there are rarely any consequences for low performance. No one's pay suffers. No one loses a job. We have accountability systems in which no one is actually held accountable when kids don't learn. The unions have also fiercely opposed the second major reform movement of our time, the movement for school choice, which seeks to give families new options, to empower them to leave bad schools, and to give the regular public schools stronger incentives to improve. Here, too, the unions fight for their members, not for students and their families. In this case, because school choice allows children, and thus money and jobs, to leave the schools where union members teach. Indeed, the unions are so opposed to choice that they fight to defeat it even for the poorest kids trapped in the nation's worst schools. As a result, after decades of reform efforts, only 4% of public school kids are in charter schools, and less than 1% receive government-funded scholarships for private schools. But here's what it comes down to. The teachers' unions have used their power from the bottom up through collective bargaining to burden the schools with organizations that are literally not designed to be effective. And they've used their power from the top down, through politics, to stand in the way of accountability, choice, and other major reform efforts. As Arnie Duncan well expressed, the nation is fully aware that it has a problem with its public schools. But the main reason that problem persists is that there's another problem, a more fundamental one, that prevents real change and improvement, the problem of union power. Until the nation is able to recognize that problem and do something about it, America's public schools will never be organized to provide kids with the most effective education possible. I'm Terry Moe, professor of political science at Stanford University, for Prager University.
Maybe the dumbest thing you can do is go to the place that's supposed to make you smart. That would be college. Now, perhaps I'm biased. I don't have a college degree, although I employ a lot of people who do, and from some of the most prestigious universities in the country. I made a conscious choice. I had clear career ambitions, and I didn't see how a college degree was going to get me there. In retrospect, I'm confident I made the right decision. I'm the co-founder and co-CEO of a company called The Daily Wire. We publish news and commentary from a conservative point of view. We have well over 100 employees and an audience which numbers in the millions every single day. Now, I don't have a problem if you go to college. It's a free country, do what you want. But the idea that somehow college is the great pathway to success and fulfillment, that I don't buy. The left takes a different view. They are obsessed with higher education. To them, it's a human right, and they want it to be free, which just means paid for by people like me, for anyone who's 18 and can breathe. That makes perfect sense from their point of view. One, the idea is a big winner among young people, a critical voting bloc. Who doesn't want something for nothing, especially something that costs more than a Ferrari? And two, colleges exist to do one thing, create conformity of thought. And since college professors and administrators overwhelmingly lean left, it's a pretty good bet most of their students will as well. But I'm being unfair, you say. After all, we live in a knowledge-based world, and America isn't making the grade. Don't you know we rank 13th in the world in reading, 18th in science literacy, and a pitiful 37th in math? To which I say, so what? It wasn't Singapore that split the atom, or Estonia that mapped the human genome. America is number one in Nobel Prizes awarded, number one in scientific citations issued, number one in popular entertainment, and number one in technological advancement. In short, America creates almost everything. Even what other countries manufacture was probably invented by an American, which is why we're also the number one economy in the world by far. And who made this possible? Well, here are the names of just a few of the individuals who pretty much invented the modern world. Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, Steve Jobs, Michael Dell, and Larry Ellison. None of them has a college degree. Many of the CEOs who run the companies they created do have college degrees, but the founders do not. What they do have are things colleges can't teach you: curiosity, ambition, and a willingness to fail. Those qualities almost guarantee success. A college diploma doesn't. Want to build an airplane? Engineers educated in aerodynamics are handy to have on your team. Want to invent the airplane? Well, you're better off finding a couple of restless bicycle repairmen. That's what the Wright brothers were. It's not that colleges aren't teaching. It's that too often they're teaching the wrong things, or they're teaching the right things the wrong way. Tech entrepreneur David Gelernter says, "The thing I don't look for in a developer is a degree in computer science." Quite a statement from a man who teaches computer science at Yale. Tech billionaire and co-founder of PayPal, Peter Thiel, actually pays people not to go to college. Thiel and Gelernter understand that colleges are factories, and like all factories, they want to produce a consistent product. That means producing people who all think alike. But innovation and entrepreneurship require people who think differently. Innovators innovate. Colleges teach those innovations after the fact. If professors could have taught engineers how to build the airplane in 1903, professors would have built the airplane before 1903. They would have invented the personal computer, Microsoft, and social media too. And it's not only big tech where this applies. 56% of all small business owners in the United States don't have a 4-year degree. That's right, the majority of small business owners, who employ more than half of American workers, either never went to or never finished college. What all of this says to me is that while college is useful for some people, it's by no means necessary for all. And it's hardly essential for economic success, not for the individual and not for the nation. No one is being deprived of the opportunity to succeed simply because they can't afford a university's steep price tag. In fact, if you go to college, there's a good chance you'll be taught how not to succeed. If I were you, I'd think long and hard before paying for that. I'm Jeremy Boring for Prager University.
Historically, education in the United States has been split between private schools and traditional public schools. However, this dynamic changed in 1991 when Minnesota passed the first law establishing charter schools in the state. Since then, a majority of states have some kind of charter school system. But what exactly is a charter school? Charter schools offer education ranging in grades K through 12 without charge to students. Charter schools are funded with tax dollars, but are generally subject to fewer rules and regulations than traditional public schools, and they usually receive less public funds per pupil than public schools. Charter school students typically take the same state-required standardized tests as public school students. Depending on state law, these schools can be started by parents, teachers, nonprofit groups, corporations, or even government organizations. Charter schools may focus on specific skills and subjects like math or science, or may be aimed at students who require alternative learning methods, such as teaching lessons that use visual or more hands-on approaches. But these entities just can't start one whenever they please. They must first obtain authorization from either the school district, city, or state, depending on how the charter school laws are structured. And the charter school model has achieved various levels of success. Over the past 25 years, the number of charter schools in the U.S. has skyrocketed, forcing more competition and faster improvement among existing public and private schools. As of 2016, there are almost 7,000 charter schools serving 3 million students. And since 2000, charter school enrollment has increased by 600%. But as charter schools have become more popular, opposition has grown. Teachers' unions and other public school activists argue that charter schools take money away from traditional public schools. However, it's unfair to hold minority parents and students hostage in underperforming public schools. Overall, charter schools have provided an entrepreneurial challenge to the status quo and delivered results that make it worth expanding this option for parents. According to a 2015 Stanford study, not only do charter schools provide significantly higher levels of growth in math and reading for all students, but minority and low-income students benefit disproportionately more. Charter schools are becoming a bigger part of the U.S. education system every year, and for millions of American families, they offer a much-needed choice that's different than a one-size-fits-all public school. Every other sector of the American economy has benefited from the ability to compete and improve. Why not education?
Year after year, Americans pour billions of dollars into colleges and universities. I'm not talking about the outrageous tuition costs, living expenses, and fees, the debt pit students fall into. And I'm not talking about the tax money, our money colleges and universities get from federal and state governments. I'm talking about the money Americans are handing over to these institutions of their own free will. In 2017, that number was $44 billion. $44 billion in donations in 1 year from alumni and other donors. And for what? To enhance the education of America's youth? Do you really think our college graduates are better educated, more literate, more versed in classical philosophy and American history than they were 10, 20, or 50 years ago? If your child goes to college and spends 4 years partying, skipping class, and playing video games, consider yourself lucky. It's when they actually listen to their radical professors that you're in trouble. So, what have our institutions been doing with all this money? Well, the University of Michigan's Vice Provost of Equity and Inclusion makes $400,000 a year. The university spends close to $11 million annually on diversity and inclusion staff and programs, according to a recent report. What do you think Vice Provosts of Equity and Inclusion, and almost all schools have one now, do all day? They, and the small armies they supervise, spend all day, every day, looking for racism, sexism, classism, Islamophobia, homophobia, transphobia, and any other phobias they can dream up. If they don't find some bias somewhere, they're out of a job. So guess what? They find it, even where it doesn't exist. The University of California at Santa Cruz now has an, quote, activist in residence. His job is to mint new leftist activists, as if we have a shortage. Why are we voluntarily giving billions and billions of dollars to hopelessly corrupt institutions that overcharge, underdeliver, and undermine the most basic values of Western civilization? We should be starving this beast. Instead, we're feeding it. Are there exceptions to this rule? Colleges that are actually dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge and wisdom? Of course there are, and they are worthy of your financial support, but you can count them on two hands. The rest have a different mission, and they have more than enough coin to carry it out. The aforementioned University of Michigan has an endowment of $12 billion, but that's small potatoes compared to Yale's $30 billion or Harvard's $40 billion. And donors keep giving them more. It's time to stop. You'd be better throwing your money into a bonfire. That's just a waste. But when you donate to your average university, you're actually hurting your society. You're the reason kids, maybe your kids, are coming home, loving socialism and hating free market capitalism, believing male and female don't objectively exist, excusing rockets being shot into Israel, then blaming Israel for defending itself, romanticizing Che Guevara and reviling George Washington, and dismissing America, arguably the most decent country ever created, as racist, genocidal, imperialist, white supremacist, hate-filled, and misogynistic. Your children are being fed a steady diet of this nihilism in grade school, middle school, and high school, but they have to come home for dinner every night. College is where the leftist deal is sealed. They're free of your influence and under the sway of their leftist professors and leftist peers. Stop supporting institutions that don't support your values, that, in fact, despise your values. And believe me, they despise you when your back is turned. The only thing they love about you is your money. Oh, you might say, I would never give money for all that diversity, equity, and inclusion nonsense. I designate my donations to the business school or the medical center. If you think that, you're fooling yourself. Money is fungible. You can designate it for anything you want, but you can't control what the university does with it. I travel around the country every week trying to rescue kids from the leftist cult that is college. It's bad enough that I have to battle administrators, professors, and leftist student body. I shouldn't have to fight you, too. College has become a big business. Most indoctrinate rather than educate. The best way to force them to change is to take away their cash. Your cash. Start today. I'm Charlie Kirk, founder and president of Turning Point USA for Prager University.
This video was made possible by a generous grant from Colorado Christian University, one of the few colleges worthy of your support. Find out more about them at prageru.com/ccu.
I'm guessing you've heard of the acclaimed TV show, Game of Thrones. 7 kingdoms vying for power, plots within plots, watch your back or lose your head. It's great. But you've probably never heard of the real-life drama that I call the Game of Loans. That's a game Washington politicians play on young people, that is, college students, every day. Just like Game of Thrones, the Game of Loans has plots within plots, big winners, and big losers. The winners are politicians and colleges. They fool students into thinking that by generously providing ever larger college loans to cover ever larger tuition costs, they have earned students' votes at election time. Why do I say students are fooled? Because it is thanks to the very politicians who promise students more and more aid in league with the colleges, that college tuition became so expensive in the first place. Here's how the game works. According to Bloomberg News, since 1978, the cost of a college education has gone up by over 1,000%, way past the rate of inflation. Tuition alone at many colleges is $20,000, $40,000, even $50,000 a year. So how do you pay for it? Answer: student loans. Loans the government is happy to give you since they collect the interest. You don't have to be a finance major to figure out that all these student loans give colleges no incentive to cut costs. Instead, it gives them every incentive to raise costs. Higher tuition obviously means more money for the college. Now, if students were going to college in record numbers to study engineering or computer science or biology, professions with high employment rates, maybe these crazy sums would make some sense. Maybe. But the most common majors are in the social sciences and communications, in subjects like sociology, cinema history, and gender studies. Not surprisingly, these majors have very high unemployment rates, as in, they don't prepare you for a job. And these majors are mainstream. You can get a degree in storytelling, bagpiping, and puppet arts for your $50,000 a year. But here's the point. Colleges are no longer primarily about preparing you for a career. Today's higher education is about teaching you what a terrible country America is, social activism, and binge drinking. Hey, if college didn't cost so much, the parties might be worth it. But it does. The average student loan debt in America is $28,400 per borrower. Note, that is per borrower, not graduate. Big difference. A large chunk of the $1.3 trillion student loan liability is held by ex-students who never graduated. For every 100 students who enter a 4-year college, only 59 exit with a degree. But maybe you're one of the lucky ones. You got a business degree and you found a decent job. Chances are you're paying off your student loans and will be for the next 10, 20, or even 30 years. Good luck saving money for a down payment on a house or just about anything else. Mike Rowe from the TV show Dirty Jobs nicely summarized the issue this way. We are lending money we don't have to kids who can't pay it back to train them for jobs that no longer exist. So am I saying college is always a waste of time and money? Of course not. But I am saying this. 1. Remember that if you take out a student loan, it's not free money. You actually have to pay it back. I know this sounds ridiculously basic, but it's also ridiculously important. And since you owe this money to the federal government, you can't get out of it, even if you declare bankruptcy. 2. Whenever you hear politicians say they want to make college more affordable, what they're really saying is they want to get the youth vote while making it easier for you to dig yourself into a deep hole. These politicians don't have your best interest at heart. They have their own best interests at heart, namely, getting elected. You don't owe them anything. The game of loans is rigged and not in your favor. But if you're smart about your choices, you can beat the odds. I'm Charlie Kirk of Turning Point USA for Prager University.
College can be pretty great, whether it's the football games, learning about business, history, marine biology, or thousands of other topics, or pizza at 4 in the morning. But why has college gotten so expensive? In 1980, a year of college cost $3,400. Today, the average cost is more than $23,000. What's going on? A great deal of blame lies with the government. You see, government tries to help students by providing loans and financial aid. That is a great intention. But when government helps pay for things, people tend to forget how much these things cost in the first place. Things like college tuition. Whether it's from the students or the government, Colleges get their money. And when the schools know that students have more money to spend, even if it's the government's money, they can raise the cost of admission. Think about that college town pizza place. If the government provided subsidies to buy $5 pizzas, we would all cheer, right? And want to buy more pizza. For a short time, yes. But before long, the higher demand fueled by these artificially low prices would encourage the pizza place owner to charge more for pizza, knowing that many people were getting government pizza assistance. And this says nothing of the taxpayers who are stuck paying for the pizza subsidies. So the next time people complain about the high cost of college, explain how government policy that tries to help students afford college now actually hurts future students down the road.
Being a normal boy is a serious liability in today's classroom. Boys tend to be disorganized and restless. Some have even been known to be noisy and hard to manage. Sound like any boy you know? But increasingly, our schools have little patience for what only a couple of decades ago would have been described as boyishness. As psychologist Michael Thompson has aptly observed, girls' behavior is the gold standard in schools. Boys are treated like defective girls. Now, as a result, these defective girls are not faring well academically. Compared with girls, boys earn lower grades, they win fewer honors, they're far less likely to go to college. Boys are languishing academically while girls are prospering. In an ever more knowledge-based economy, this is not a recipe for a successful society. We need to start thinking about how we can make our grade school classrooms more boy-friendly. Well, here are 4 reforms that would make a very good start. 1, turn boys into readers. In all age groups, across all ethnic lines, boys score lower than girls on national reading tests. Good reading skills, need I say, are critical to academic and workplace success. A major study in the UK discovered, not surprisingly, that girls prefer fiction, magazines, and poetry, while boys prefer comics and nonfiction. Boys whose eyes glaze over if forced to read Little House on the Prairie may be riveted by the Guinness Book of Records.
Cool.
Boys will read if given materials that interest them. If you're looking for suggestions for books that have proved irresistible to boys, go to guysread.com. 2, inspire the male imagination. Celebrated writing instructor Ralph Fletcher contends that too many teachers take what is called the confessional poet as the classroom ideal. Personal narratives full of emotions and self-disclosure. These are stories girls commonly write, and these are prized, whereas action stories describing, say, a skateboard competition or a monster devouring a city, these are not. I recently read about a 3rd grader in Southern California named Justin who loved science fiction, pirates, and battles. Well, an alarmed teacher summoned his parents to school to discuss the picture the 8-year-old had drawn of a sword fight, which included several decapitated heads. The teacher expressed grave concern about Justin's values. The boy's father was astonished, not by his son's drawing, which to him was typical boy stuff, but by the teacher's overwrought and female-centered reaction. If boys are constantly subject to disapproval for their interests and enthusiasms, they're likely to become disengaged and lag further behind. Our schools need to work with, not against, the kinetic imaginations of boys. 3, zero out, zero tolerance. Boys are nearly 5 times as likely to be expelled from preschool as girls. And in grades K through 12, boys account for nearly 70% of suspensions. Now, this is often for minor acts of insubordination and sometimes for entirely innocent behavior. Hardly a week goes by without a news story about a young boy running afoul of a school's zero-tolerance policy. Josh Welsh, age 7, was recently sent home from his Maryland school for nibbling off the corners of a strawberry Pop-Tart into the shape of a gun. Josh, like many other boys punished for violating zero-tolerance policies, was guilty of nothing more than being a typical 7-year-old boy. 4, bring back recess. Believe it or not, recess may soon be a thing of the past. According to research summarized by the Science Daily, Since the 1970s, school children have lost close to 50% of their unstructured outdoor playtime. And much-loved games have vanished from schoolyards. In schools throughout the country, games like dodgeball, Red Rover, even tag have all but disappeared. Too damaging to self-esteem or too violent being the usual excuse. One popular classroom guide suggests tug of war be replaced with tug of peace. Boys need to work off their energy. They need to be free to play games they enjoy, and keeping them cooped up and inside all day will not help them learn. As our schools become more feeling-centered, more competition-free, more sedentary, they move further away from the needs of boys. We need to reverse the boy-averse trends. Male underachievement is everyone's concern. These are our sons. These are the young men with whom our daughters will build a future. If boys are in trouble, so are we all. I'm Christina Hoff Summers at the American Enterprise Institute for Prager University.
Hey, I've got a great investment idea for you. You give me $100,000 and 4 years of your life, and I give you, pretty much nothing. No, I'm not the devil. I'm Mr. College, and I'm here to help you finance this wonderful opportunity. I have a whole package of government loans and impressive sounding scholarships to make it all possible. Of course, you'll have to pay interest on the loans, which will double the cost over time, but that's a problem for future you, and need not concern us now. Do we have a deal? Yes. Of course we do. You want to succeed in life, don't you? How can you do that without a college degree? But that doesn't mean you can't have a good time. Are you a movie fan? We've got a degree for that. How about criminal justice? Be like one of the cool people on the TV detective shows. And we offer a whole selection of minority and gender studies programs. Learn why you're a victim and deserve to be angry all the time. What are you waiting for? Sign on the dotted line. Classes begin in the fall. Don't miss orientation, especially if you're male. You don't want to be parading your toxic masculinity around the campus. Definitely not cool. Sound crazy? I don't know why it should. Millions of college students make that deal every year, usually with their parents' encouragement and financial support. Now, don't get me wrong. I have nothing against going to college. I sincerely believe it can be a worthwhile pursuit under the right circumstances. If you want to be a doctor or an architect, for example, it's obviously a necessity. But look through the typical college syllabus, and it's clear that most of the majors, not to mention classes, are a waste of time and money. So why do responsible adults who only want the best for their children and are usually cautious with their hard-earned money squander it on such a bad investment? Worse, why would they send their son or daughter to a school to learn to reject the values they, the parents, hold dear? On what planet does that make sense? It doesn't. It's an old paradigm, and we need to break it before it breaks us. How do we do that? Here are 2 solutions that would go a long way to solving the problem. 1, ask yourself if you really need to go to college. Most of us go to college because it's simply expected that we do so. Our parents expect it. Our friends expect it. Plus, it sounds like fun, a rite of passage, an escape from mom and dad and all their rules. But none of that actually has anything to do with getting an education or earning a living after you leave college. Maybe you're not the academic type. What's wrong with that? Nothing. According to a Georgetown University study, there are 30 million jobs paying over $55,000 a year that don't require a college degree. Learn a skill like welding or plumbing or a dozen other trades, and you'll never be looking for a job. The jobs will be looking for you. We're talking $50 an hour or more, 6-figure income after 5 years, and no debt. Consider the military. You learn essential skills, and again, no debt. Or go into sales. You don't need a sociology degree for that. If you are going to college, then have a goal and a plan to achieve it. Your college journey will cost you and or your parents a boatload of money. What are you going to get in return? Choose your courses with a practical mindset. Stay away from the silly stuff. And if you really don't know why you're going to college, consider answer 2. Delay college for a year or longer. If more graduating high school seniors would do this, not jump into college immediately after high school, college curriculums would improve, and nonsense like safe spaces would disappear. Why? Because students who had spent a year or longer in the real world wouldn't put up with it. Get a job, any job, for a year before starting college. What's the big rush anyway? 1 year isn't going to make a difference as to whether or not you succeed in life, but waiting tables or stacking boxes or whatever you do for a year will almost certainly change your attitude about a lot of things, like how hard it is to earn $1 and how easy it is for the government to take that dollar away. You will also develop a new appreciation for the privilege of going to college, and you'll be much more likely to be immune to the BS. Don't be a passive investor as a student or a parent. Your education is too expensive and too important to be left to Mr. College. He might have your money. Don't give him your mind. I'm Charlie Kirk, founder and president of Turning Point USA for Prager University.